The following subject matter is real and only intended for mature audiences. Discretion is advised.
People are dead after deputies say a man went on a shooting rampage.
I knew a week before she died I was going to kill her.
I can tell you the scene out there is absolutely horrific.
Nobody knows where this individual may strike next.
This is 10-Minute Murder.
Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, the host, and thank you for joining today. Also, thanks for all the latest ratings and reviews. It makes me glad to read what you all think of the show and that you're enjoying it. And some of you sent messages and emails telling me that you listen every day on the way to work or at work, or a whole bunch of you listen on road trips. You binge listen to a whole bunch of the episodes for hours at a time on road trips. And by the way, that's why I call the show bingeable, because the show is like a plate of nachos, and each individual chip is like an episode. And sometimes those chips stick together because there's a cheese overload situation, and it turns out to be a much bigger bite than usual. And those chips are like the occasional longer episodes that I stick in there from time to time. And it might be the worst/best analogy that's ever popped in my head, depending on how you look at that. But I'm sorry or you're welcome, either one. Hey, another thing I need to mention before we get going with today's episode. I'm starting to put the episodes on YouTube. You can subscribe to 10-Minute Murder on YouTube and watch me talk instead of or in addition to listening to me talk. And the current plan is to release them on YouTube a day after. So, for example, if this episode is released on Tuesday, then you can listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, I'll post the video of it on YouTube. And I may not be able to post every single episode, but I'm going to try to do it as often as I can. And I create a lot of episodes, that's why it may not be possible. And I'd like to have a chance to go and do fun things away from my house from time to time, occasionally, and maybe watch my child grow up. So he thinks he's a grown-up now anyway, so whatever. And now to today's story. Holy crap, we are letting her go free. Those were the words of one of the 12 jurors just as they had voted to acquit 25-year-old Caylee Marie Anthony of murder charges over 10 years ago. To this day, the decision haunts those involved and outrages many. After all, Caylee was accused of murdering her 2-year-old daughter Caylee, but was eventually let go. The public was left without any answers, and many of those who have kept up with the case still believe that the verdict was wrong. Of course, it is possible that Caylee was completely innocent and a victim herself, but her story was truly a hot mess from the beginning. Questions started right after Caylee Marie Anthony was born on August 9, 2005. Caylee had repeatedly denied her pregnancy to her family members, which was already a little strange, but she also didn't know who Caylee's father was. Caylee said it might have been a man named Eric Baker, who had died in a car accident, or another man, Jesus Ortiz, who had also died in a car accident. A woman named Donna McLean later claimed that her son, Michael Duggan, was the father. But take a guess of what happened to him. If you said died in a car accident, bingo. Of course, the most likely father candidate was Caylee's then-fiancé, Jesse Grund. But he was eliminated by a paternity test. Caylee initially said she didn't feel like she was ready to be a mother and was even thinking about giving Caylee up for adoption. However, her mother, Cindy, talked her out of the idea. Despite everything, Caylee seemed to try her best to be a good mother. According to those close to her, Caylee never mistreated Caylee, and still, she hid the fact that the little girl suddenly went missing 3 months before her 3rd birthday. The situation began to unfold on July 15, 2008, with a frantic phone call to 911 from Caylee's mother, Cindy, in Orlando, Florida. She said, quote, "I found out my granddaughter has been taken. She's been missing for a month." Earlier that day, Cindy and Caylee's father, George, learned that a family car used by Caylee had been impounded, so they went to recover the vehicle, and they immediately became concerned because the car smelled like death, even from afar. Cindy called 911 reporting that Caylee had stolen their car, adding that the vehicle now smelled like, quote, a dead body. Cindy and George then tracked down Caylee and demanded to know where Caylee was. At this point, they had not seen their granddaughter since Caylee and Caylee had suddenly moved out of the house a little over a month earlier. Afterward, Caylee had repeatedly refused any contact between Caylee and her grandparents, telling lie after lie about her daughter's whereabouts. But now when she was confronted by both her parents and her brother Lee, Caylee began to break down. She initially claimed that Caylee had vanished a month earlier after she left her with a nanny named Zianda Fernandez Gonzalez. When asked why she failed to inform authorities about Caylee's possible kidnapping, Caylee said, "I avoided calling the police or even notifying my family out of fear. I have been and still am afraid of what has or may happen to Caylee." So, for 31 days, Caylee had been allegedly looking for Caylee by herself without telling anyone. 31 days. That alone was reason enough for the police to arrest Caylee the next day, on July 16th. They also discovered that Caylee had been lying about her place of employment and where she said that the alleged nanny lived. It seemed like Caylee didn't have any idea of what truth even was, or she just didn't care. She had brought the police to Universal Studios claiming she worked there and even led them around before finally turning around and saying, "I don't work here." In addition, the apartment where Caylee claimed that Zanny, the nanny, lived turned out to be uninhabited, and no woman by that name was ever connected to Caylee or Caylee. Caylee's lies just kept going, and so she was charged the following day with giving false statements to law enforcement, child neglect, and obstruction of a criminal investigation. At a bond hearing, evidence of human decomposition odor in the trunk of the car at the Caylee's backyard was introduced. Investigators also found chloroform inside the car and on Caylee's favorite doll. Despite relatively minor charges, the judge set bail at $500,000 because of the alarming evidence and seemingly indifferent behavior of Caylee herself. On October 14, 2008, Caylee's charges were changed from aggravated child abuse to first-degree murder, as it was very likely that Caylee was deceased at this point. However, nobody knew yet that her remains had actually already been found 2 months earlier. In August, Orange County meter reader Roy Kronk had called the police about a suspicious bag he found in the woods near the home of the missing child's grandparents. However, at first, nothing had happened. Roy made the reports on August 11, 12, and 13th, but the bag remained in the woods. It was not until December 11, 2008, when Roy once again called the police that they finally searched the area and found the remains of a child in a trash bag. A little over a week later, it was confirmed that the remains were those of Caylee Anthony. Her death was ruled a homicide, but although the skull was found with duct tape around the nose and mouth, it was impossible to tell how she actually died. And so, when Caylee's trial started May 24, 2011, both the prosecution and the defense were able to paint completely different kinds of stories about what happened to Caylee. According to the prosecution, Caylee used chloroform on her daughter before suffocating her with duct tape. Caylee was portrayed as a party girl who wanted to get rid of the responsibilities of being a mother. On the other hand, Caylee's defense team claimed that Caylee had actually accidentally drowned in the family's pool, and Caylee's father, George, covered it up so Caylee would not have to go to jail for child neglect. The defense also argued that George had molested Caylee since she was 8 years old, resulting in Caylee having difficulties in showing emotions later in life. However, George took to the stand as the first witness and denied that he ever abused his daughter or knew anything about Caylee's drowning. Finally, after almost 6 weeks of testimonies and 400 pieces of evidence presented, the jury took less than 11 hours to reach the verdict nobody was ready for: not guilty. Caylee Anthony was acquitted of murder charges. In the end, she was only convicted of the 4 counts of lying to police, but the 4-year sentence was canceled with the time she had already spent behind bars waiting for her trial. As a result, Caylee was free to go and released from prison on July 17, 2011. Many in public and the media were outraged at the not guilty verdict, comparing her case to the trial of O.J. Simpson in 1995. In both cases, people felt like the culprits got away with murder, literal murder. Since her release, now 35-year-old Caylee has been trying to live a normal life. In March 2020, it was reported that she was writing, quote, "a detailed and definitive account of her life and the tragedy of losing Caylee and everything that followed." Caylee also launched a private investigation firm in Florida, not to investigate the death of her own daughter, but to help others, especially women, who are facing serious legal charges and are wrongfully accused. According to those close to her, Caylee is now open to the idea of another child. Her father, however, gets nervous of the thought, saying, quote, I hope she does better this time around than what she did the last time. Actually, the outrage following little Caylee's case and Casey's behavior eventually led to Florida's passing the so-called Caylee's Law, making the failure to report a missing child aged 13 or younger after 24 hours a fourth-degree felony. Caylee died a tragic death that nobody deserves, but her memory still manages to live. Still, even after more than a decade since Casey Anthony's release, some people are still in disbelief, can't figure out how she got away with it. Some still believe she was innocent all along. There will always be someone searching for the truth and someone wondering what really happened. It doesn't make things any easier that a number of jurors later stated that they came back with a not guilty verdict just because the state could not prove how Caylee died. Even Judge Belvin Perry thought that Casey would be found guilty of some form of homicide, but that didn't happen. One thing is sure, Casey was found not guilty, and she can never be tried again for her daughter's murder, no matter what happens due to the justice system's doctrine of double jeopardy. We can only keep wondering if the true story of the death of Caylee Anthony will ever be told. That's today's 10-minute murder, brief and bingeable true crime. Thanks for listening today, and in case you were completely living under a rock for the last decade and didn't know anything about Casey Anthony and the death of her daughter Caylee, you know now that she's a real BLT with cheese, and it's a horrible case, and I could go on and on and on with this episode about all the lies and things like that, but to sum it up in 10 minutes, I think you got the gist of what's going on with that. Hey, if you have not subscribed to this podcast already, go ahead and do that. I'll wait. Okay, that should be long enough. Subscribe and you don't miss any episodes, and it's free. You don't have to go searching for the podcast every time you want to listen to it because it'll be right there every single time. And if you are subscribed, connect with 10 Minute Murder on Facebook or Instagram. You can type 10 Minute Murder into the search bar where you go and stalk your ex-boyfriends and girlfriends from high school. You know, you type their name. Just type in 10 Minute Murder instead, and the podcast will pop right up. You can follow along there, Facebook or Instagram, or you can just click the link in the show notes of this episode. I'll leave it there if that makes it easier for you. Thank you for listening to 10 Minute Murder. Have a good night.